Greetings, my dear brothers and sisters in Christ. Greetings from Javan Jyoti Ashram on this 32nd Sunday of Ordinary Time. Thank you for joining me yet again in these Burning Bush Encounters series as we encounter Father, Son, and Spirit, speaking to us through the Sunday Mass readings and my reflections on these readings. My reflection this Sunday is entitled, Nothing Left to Give. And the context in which I based my reflection is sacrificial giving. That is sacrificial giving out of love. The theme, based on the readings, is to have nothing left to give, points to the notion of sacrificial giving and the essence of God manifested through love. In the Gospel reading, Mark 12:38-44, Jesus, the second person of the Godhead, gives an indirect teaching on love in relation to giving from different angles. The first teaching Jesus gives is not so obvious. In historical and cultural contexts in which Jesus speaks, women were not treated equally with men, more so women who were widowed. Jesus himself describes the plight of widows, while at the same time condemning those religious leaders who helped to keep them in this unacceptable position. Jesus cautions, beware of the scribes who like to go around in long robes and accept greetings in the marketplaces, seats of honor in synagogues, and places of honor at banquets. They devour the houses of widows and, as a pretext, recite lengthy prayers. As a practical application, Jesus warns of the danger of hypocrisy. No one should be praying and serving God, yet mistreating others at the same time. Therefore, Jesus' first lesson is that God's heart is one of love, and God desires the same for all people, especially Christians who have a personal encounter with God's love through baptism and an ongoing life lived in close union with God. This makes it possible to understand why in non-Christian nations, many citizens still suffer at the hands of unjust religious leaders who tend to also assume the role of political leadership. In many countries, the predicament of women, especially that of widows, who are considered as and treated as the other, are still the same as it was in Jesus' time. Widows were, at the time of Jesus, almost condemned to death because without a man at their side to care for the family, they were left vulnerable at the mercy of others and in the precarious position of trying to survive against the odds. This is where God's love steps in, as Jesus takes the time to notice a widow's actions. And as a small testimony to the plight of women still being the same in this era, I've shared recently, more than once, at least 3 times, on the Afghan family that I've helped to rescue from Afghanistan. And that family comprises a widow and her daughter. Being a widow in the nation that she was living in, she and her daughter had no rights. They could not even leave the house to buy food. They could not leave the house unaccompanied by a male because they were considered as nothing, just women. No status, no recognition in society without a male at their side. So women in the Western world, we who live in the Western world, we take for granted the liberties, the freedom that we live in, that we enjoy as women who are independent. We can choose an education, we can choose a job, we can choose a spouse, we can choose what we want to do with our lives, with our children. Every decision lies in our own hands. We don't remember that there are women still in this world who are suffering at the hands of society, of a patriarchal mentality that still exists in this 21st century. Continue with the gospel reading. Many people would have come to offer up money in the treasury, but Jesus noted that this woman's action of giving just 2 small coins worth almost nothing was an act that caught the attention of heaven. Jesus remarks, this poor widow put in more money than all the other contributors to the treasury, for they have all contributed from their surplus wealth, but she, from her poverty, has contributed all she had, her whole livelihood. Jesus joins heaven in smiling at this widow. As a practical application, when we take the time to give to God directly or indirectly by giving to others, we really do so from what we do not have. That is, we do not give when we have nothing left to give. We often give knowing we have enough money, time, food, or other necessities left over to survive on. God's love for even those considered as least in the world is the example we are called to follow. No one is insignificant, especially those who are willing to and are giving from what they do not have. This includes those who work jobs that are considered as menial because they are working these jobs and giving service to others from what they do not have, which is money, education, or title, doing what many would be too embarrassed to do. Giving when it hurts and giving of ourselves in ways that others frown upon are acts of sacrificial giving. They are acts of love. This is the second teaching Jesus gives. One of the greatest acts of love is giving when we stand to lose even the little that we have, whether it's possessions or dignity, but we give anyway. And I want to mention here as my own little personal testimony. Many people do not know this, but when I first came to Florida and I did not have my legal status sorted out, I had nothing to give. Nothing to give to society, nothing to give to myself to survive. I had nothing left to give but my own hands, my hands of labor, to work as a cleaner, cleaning people's houses, as a maid. And I came to this country having done college, already being qualified as a teacher in my own country of birth, but having to come here and work as a maid. And I remember the first day I worked cleaning the house of a friend, because I cleaned predominantly only the house of friends who went to the same church with me, because this was their way of helping me to survive. They gave me work cleaning their homes. I remember the very first day of cleaning, I cried. And I said, God, how could I be doing a job like this? I'm a qualified person. I have an education, and I'm doing this menial job. But there's dignity. When you give, when you have nothing left to give, God blesses you. God blesses you immensely, as you would see in the story of the woman of Zarephath. She gave when she had nothing left to give, and God blessed her. Those years of working, cleaning houses were one of the times in my lives when I could say I experienced the beauty of God, the blessing, the joy of knowing God. Because in going into people's houses to pray, I was exposed to music, to teachings, to talks, to conversations that I would have with these women, these families that I was cleaning for. They were ministering to me spiritually while I was cleaning, and I was ministering to them. We would eat lunch together. We would listen to teachings on CDs, on the television, listen to spiritual music. It was as if I was their friend, which I was, coming to do work for them, but just coming to spend time with them. It was a time of ministry. We were ministering to each other. It was not work as we would look at work. It was a time God set aside to minister to me. So in giving, when I had nothing else to give, God gave me so much more in return. In the first reading, 1 Kings 17, 10 to 16, a widow is yet again the focus of a story. Right before this reading commenced, Elijah the prophet, on God's authority, proclaimed to King Ahab of Israel an impending drought. Elijah added that he himself would have the power from God to determine the beginning and the end of this drought. Then God told Elijah, go to the Wadi Cherith, where God provided Elijah with food and water. As the drought ensued from lack of rain, God told Elijah to go to Zarephath, where God said he had commanded a widow to feed Elijah. As the first reading begins, Elijah arrives at Zarephath, where he meets the widow and asks not only for water, but also for food. The woman replied, as the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked. There is only a handful of flour in my jar and a little oil in my jug. Just now, I was collecting a few sticks to go and prepare something for myself and my son. When we have eaten it, we shall die. Despite this, Elijah responded, do not be afraid. Go and do as you have said, but first make a little cake and bring it to me. Afterwards, you can prepare something for yourself and your son. The woman obeyed, and she experienced the love of God, experienced through God's omnipotence, his power to provide in ways unimaginable. The jar of flour did not go empty, but a jug of oil ran dry. And Elijah, she and her household were able to eat for a long time. And I have a powerful testimony of my mom in this regard. As far as I can remember as a child, my mother was always feeding the homeless. People would come to our home, come to our gate, calling, asking for water. And she would not just give them water, she would give them food. And she would not give them water and food in disposable dishes. She'd give it to them in the same glasses and plates and utensils that we had to use ourselves. These were people living on the streets. We would get angry with her. We would say, why would you give people food in the same things we have to use to eat? And she said, always, they are people too. They are human beings. And then when she moved, I had migrated already to the United States. She moved to a different place to live. She had a neighbor who was Hindu. He did not eat meat. He was vegetarian. An elderly man, and he became very sick. And my mom started cooking for him every single day. My family was never rich. We were not poor. We always had food. We always had everything that we needed. But my mother was not rich. And she would cook his every meal every day until he died. She would cook his food first, and then she would cook food for her family, for her husband, because she could not cook meat for him. She would cook his vegetarian food and then cook her food. She made sure he ate first before her family ate. And that is the love of God poured out. From giving when you have nothing to give, just a little that you have, you're still taking the time to give to others. The outpouring of God's love unto neighbor, stranger. My mother did not know this man. He was a new neighbor, but my mother took him under her wing as her own child. An elderly man older than her, but he became her child. She cared for him until he died, and she even took care of a funeral for him because he had no one to even bury him. As a practical application, this widow of Zarephath is like the widow who gave her last 2 coins in the gospel reading. She gave when she had nothing left to give. This story likewise demonstrates love in relation to giving from different angles. First, the love of God in providing for Elijah is clear. God sends Elijah to a place to hide, and there, exercising his omnipotence, miraculously fed Elijah. God also exercised his omnipotence by touching the heart of the widow so that she was willing to share from the little that she had with Elijah, ensuring that he ate before she and her son ate. Additionally, the widow's heart must have been moved with love for neighbor as she encountered a man begging for food and water. Only love makes a person respond to those in need. This widow, who knows that she's a widow and she has limited opportunities to provide for herself and her son, and who knows that she must feed a stranger before she and her son can have something to eat of their own food, demonstrates sacrificial giving. The second reading, Hebrews 9:24-28, reminds us that God is love. God sent his son Jesus to suffer and die once so that all might be saved. Unlike the Jewish high priest in the Jerusalem temple, who makes the sacrifices of lambs and take the blood into the sanctuary, considered at that time as the seat of life, Jesus is the Lamb who, by his sacrificial giving, that is, shedding of his blood on the cross, now sits as the high priest in the sanctuary of heaven. Jesus will appear a second time, not to take away sin, but to bring salvation to those who eagerly await him. As a practical application, it is necessary to consider here that God sent many prophets ahead of Jesus to call his chosen people, the Jewish people, into right relationship with him and commitment to him. Because the Jewish people were so stubborn and continued in their negligent living and in taking their covenant with God for granted, God had nothing left to give to save them except his own son. This is the highest form of sacrificial giving that humanity will ever experience. At every Eucharistic celebration, we remember what Jesus did for all, and we relive Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection, the Paschal mystery. Every Eucharistic celebration offers the opportunity for self-offering to God through Jesus, because when we give of ourselves, we have nothing left to give, since giving of ourselves is the greatest act of our love for God. In life, we generally tend to give based on what we believe the receiver deserves. God deserves our very selves, our lives completely, without our holding anything back for ourselves. And I leave you with this prayer. Jesus, take away any claims I may have on my life. Let me remember that without you, I would not exist. I owe everything to you. Give me the grace to love you selflessly in return. Amen. And I pray that God's blessings and mercy and love will outpour on you this week ahead. And you will also be an outpouring of blessing, mercy, and love to others. God bless you.